Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back in time to the vibrant, bustling world of the Aztec Empire. Imagine standing on the edge of a tranquil lake, with the sounds of water lapping against the shores and the occasional bird song filling the air. In the middle of the water, you see a series of lush, green floating gardens. This might sound like something out of a dream, but these were real. They were the Chinampas, the Aztecs' ingenious solution to a common problem: how to farm in a city built on an island surrounded by lakes. The floating gardens weren't just agricultural wonders, they were also a secret to peaceful nights and a source of pride for the Aztec people. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine a city surrounded by water, the heart of a thriving empire, Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec world. Now, picture this: amidst the bustle and noise, where people are constantly working, farming, and trading, there existed a quiet oasis. The Chinampas were not just a farming solution, they were a way to create a peaceful haven in an otherwise chaotic, crowded world. These floating gardens were a place where the Aztecs could grow their food, and also, just maybe, catch a peaceful night's sleep. Today, we'll explore how these gardens were made, how they contributed to the daily life of the Aztecs, and how they might have played a role in ensuring a good night's sleep for those who lived and worked on them. The Chinampas were a remarkable creation, and the fact that they allowed the Aztecs to manage both their agricultural needs and their environment speaks to the ingenuity of this ancient civilization. And who knows? Maybe it was the tranquility of these floating islands that allowed the hard-working farmers a peaceful, restful sleep after a long day's work. To understand how the Aztecs developed their ingenious floating gardens, we need to step back and explore their origins. The creation of Chinampas was a response to a fundamental problem: how to create arable land in a city surrounded by lakes, like Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs didn't have the luxury of vast tracts of land to cultivate. Instead, they had to be incredibly creative to make the most of their environment. And they did so with remarkable success. Tenochtitlan was built on an island in Lake Texcoco, a large, shallow body of water in central Mexico. The city was surrounded by other small islands, and the water itself was crucial for transport and trade. But there was a catch: although the water was abundant, the land for farming was limited. The Aztecs needed more space to grow food for the growing population. And that's where Chinampas came in. These artificial islands were created by piling up mud from the lakebed, then securing it with reeds and plants to create stable, floating platforms for farming. Historians still argue about the exact origins of Chinampas. Some believe the practice was developed by earlier cultures living around Lake Texcoco, such as the Xochimilca people, who are still known for their floating gardens today. Others suggest that the Aztecs perfected the technique, making it more widespread and efficient. Regardless of who originally invented the concept, the Aztecs took it to new heights, transforming it into a key element of their agricultural system. By the time the Spanish arrived, Chinampas were a defining feature of Tenochtitlan's landscape. Creating a Chinampa wasn't a simple task, it required considerable skill and effort. First, the Aztecs would build a framework of wooden posts along the lake's shore to create a foundation. Then, they would use lake mud, reeds, and aquatic plants to form the actual garden. The Chinampas were designed to be self-sustaining. The lake's water would flow through the roots of the plants, providing them with necessary nutrients and moisture. The Aztecs didn't need to rely on rainfall alone, they had a built-in irrigation system thanks to the water surrounding them. This made Chinampas incredibly productive, allowing the Aztecs to grow a variety of crops, including maize, beans, squash, and even flowers. But the Chinampas weren't just about increasing food production, they also had a cultural and spiritual significance. The floating gardens were seen as an embodiment of the Aztec relationship with nature and the gods. In Aztec cosmology, water was a sacred element, and the act of creating land out of water symbolized the harmonious relationship between humans and the natural world. The construction of Chinampas was an expression of the Aztecs' deep understanding of the environment, as well as their belief in their power to shape and control nature. The process of creating Chinampas was labor-intensive, but it paid off in the long run. The Aztecs could cultivate crops on these floating islands year-round, using the lake's natural resources and sophisticated irrigation systems to ensure a steady food supply. This allowed them to support their growing population, especially in the bustling capital city of Tenochtitlan. The floating gardens were so successful that they helped make the Aztec Empire one of the most powerful and prosperous civilizations in the Americas. Historians still debate whether Chinampas were used in other parts of Mesoamerica before the Aztecs' rise to power. Some suggest that the technique was introduced by neighboring cultures, while others argue that the Aztecs were the true innovators. Regardless of the specifics, the importance of the Chinampas to the Aztec way of life cannot be overstated. These floating gardens were a critical element of the Aztec economy and way of life, supporting not only agriculture but also contributing to the peace and balance that allowed the people of Tenochtitlan to thrive. Now that we've learned about the origins of the Chinampas, let's take a closer look at the fascinating process by which the Aztecs actually built these floating gardens. The construction of a Chinampa wasn't a simple task, but it was a masterpiece of engineering and ingenuity. The Aztecs weren't just making do with what they had, they were creating a highly productive, sustainable farming system that would feed their city and leave a legacy of environmental wisdom that still inspires modern agriculture today. The process began with the construction of a frame. To create the foundation of the floating garden, the Aztecs would plant long stakes, often made of cypress wood, deep into the lakebed. These stakes formed the boundaries of the Chinampa, creating a grid-like structure in the water. The wooden stakes were carefully placed to ensure that the framework was stable, as it would later hold the weight of the soil and crops. Once the frame was in place, the Aztecs began the process of filling it with material that would allow plants to grow. They used mud from the lakebed, which was rich in nutrients, as the primary material for filling the Chinampa. The fertile lake mud was shoveled onto the framework, creating a solid base. This mud wasn't just any dirt, it was rich in organic material, allowing plants to thrive in an environment that otherwise lacked traditional soil. This process, although backbreaking, allowed the Aztecs to create arable land on water, an incredible feat of resourcefulness. To ensure that the Chinampa wouldn't float away or sink, the Aztecs used reed mats to secure the mud and plants. These mats, woven from reeds harvested from the lake, acted as a stabilizing layer, holding everything together. These mats also provided additional material to help keep the Chinampa afloat. After several layers of mud and reed mats were added, the Chinampa began to take shape as a viable farming plot. Once the structure was built, it was time to add plants. The Aztecs typically planted their crops in rows, using the raised bed system to protect them from flooding and pests. The abundance of water in the surrounding lakes meant that the plants had constant access to moisture, and the nutrient-rich soil from the lakebed ensured that the crops had plenty of nourishment. This method of farming allowed for year-round crop production, something that was rare in other parts of Mesoamerica. The construction of a Chinampa was a collaborative process. It took several skilled workers to build, and it required a deep understanding of the environment. Aztec farmers, aided by their knowledge of the land and water systems, would work together to build these floating gardens, contributing to their community's overall success. It wasn't just about growing food, it was about creating a sustainable system that allowed them to thrive in the challenging environment of Tenochtitlan. Historians still argue about how much of the Chinampa construction process was based on trial and error versus cultural tradition. Some suggest that the technique was honed over generations of experimentation, while others believe that the Aztecs developed the system through careful observation of the natural world. Regardless of how it was first conceived, the Chinampa system was nothing short of genius, reflecting the Aztecs' deep understanding of the environment around them. The Chinampas were more than just a farming technique, they were a sustainable solution to the problem of limited land in an urbanized society. By using the water as a resource, the Aztecs were able to create fertile, productive farmland in the most unlikely of places, on water. This innovation would help them feed a growing population and support the thriving city of Tenochtitlan. In the end, the Chinampas were a beautiful synthesis of nature, engineering, and agriculture, a way to make the most of the environment and create something sustainable and lasting. And while we may not use floating gardens today, we can still look to the Aztecs as a model for sustainable, environmentally conscious farming practices that prioritize the health of both the land and the people who rely on it. Now that we've examined how Chinampas were built, let's take a closer look at the materials the Aztecs used to construct their floating gardens. The ingenuity of these gardens was not just in their design, but also in the clever use of the natural resources available to the Aztecs. Building Chinampas wasn't just about piling mud onto a wooden frame, it required a deep understanding of the environment and the materials that would allow them to thrive in a lake environment. One of the key materials in the construction of a Chinampa was ahuehuete, a type of cypress tree that grew around the edges of the lakes in the region. The Aztecs used these trees to create the foundational stakes that formed the outer frame of the Chinampas. These stakes were driven into the soft, muddy lakebed to create a stable boundary for the floating gardens. The cypress wood was durable and resistant to decay, making it an ideal material to hold the structure together. These wooden stakes were not just functional, they also provided a direct connection to the environment, as the trees were seen as symbols of life and growth in Aztec culture. Once the stakes were in place, the Aztecs needed to fill in the framework with something that could hold soil and support plant life. For this, they used the nutrient-rich mud from the bottom of the lakes. This lakebed mud, called serenity, was an abundant and essential resource. The mud was rich in organic material, making it incredibly fertile. It acted as a perfect growing medium for crops, as the nutrients from the lake helped plants grow in a way that was not possible on the land surrounding the lakes. The use of this natural resource made the Chinampas system highly productive and sustainable, as it allowed for the efficient growth of crops without the need for extensive irrigation systems. Another key component of the Chinampa structure was tule, a type of reed found in the wetlands around the lakes. Tule was woven into mats and used to line the bottom of the Chinampa and secure the soil. These mats served to stabilize the soil and keep it from floating away, while also providing a layer of buoyancy that allowed the Chinampas to remain afloat. The reed mats were an ingenious solution to the problem of keeping the floating garden stable in the water, and they also had the added benefit of being easy to replace if they became worn or damaged. In addition to tule, the Aztecs used camas, another type of reed, along with various other aquatic plants to help reinforce the structure of the Chinampa. These plants were woven into the mats to add strength and durability, creating a solid foundation for growing crops. The abundance of these natural resources in the lakes made the process of building Chinampas relatively inexpensive, as the materials were easy to gather and use. Interestingly, the process of gathering and using these materials wasn't just a matter of practicality. The Aztecs also imbued these resources with spiritual significance. The ahuehuete tree, for example, was associated with the god Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. The use of cypress wood in the construction of Chinampas was not just a matter of function, it was also a way of invoking the favor of the gods and ensuring that the crops grown on the floating gardens would be plentiful. Historians still debate how much of the spiritual aspect of Chinampa construction was a formalized practice versus a cultural belief. Some argue that the Aztecs understood the practicality of using these materials, while others suggest that the spiritual significance of the materials played an equal role in their selection. Regardless, the use of ahuehuete, tule, and serenity was a testament to the Aztecs' ability to work in harmony with their environment, using the resources around them to create something truly remarkable. The materials used in Chinampa construction also reflect the Aztecs' deep understanding of the natural world. They didn't just use these materials for their immediate functionality, they also knew how to work with the environment in a sustainable way. The Chinampa system was designed to mimic natural processes, utilizing water, soil, and plant life to create a self-sustaining ecosystem. This approach allowed the Aztecs to grow crops year-round, contributing to the prosperity of Tenochtitlan and the success of their empire. Now that we've explored the construction of the Chinampas, let's take a closer look at how these floating gardens played a crucial role in Aztec agriculture. In a city like Tenochtitlan, built on an island in the middle of a lake, available land for farming was limited. The creation of Chinampas allowed the Aztecs to overcome this limitation, providing them with fertile land to grow crops and sustain their growing population. The Chinampas were incredibly productive, with some estimates suggesting they could produce up to 7 crops per year, an impressive feat considering the challenges of farming on an island. By using the nutrient-rich mud from the lake bed and the surrounding aquatic plants, the Aztecs created highly fertile plots of land that could support a variety of crops, including maize, beans, squash, chilies, and even flowers. This diversity of crops was essential to the Aztec diet, providing a steady supply of food for both the common people and the elite. The beauty of the Chinampas system was in its sustainability. The Aztecs used the water of the lake to irrigate their crops, with the water flowing through the roots of the plants, ensuring they had access to a constant supply of moisture. This system of natural irrigation meant that the Chinampas didn't rely solely on rainfall, which could be erratic. The Chinampas were essentially self-watering gardens, with the surrounding water acting as a natural reservoir. This gave the Aztecs a reliable and efficient way to grow crops year-round, providing food for their city even during dry periods. But it wasn't just the physical land and water that made the Chinampas system work so well, it was the way the Aztecs managed their environment. They understood the relationship between the soil, water, and plants, and they used that knowledge to create a system that was both productive and sustainable. The Aztecs didn't just take from the environment, they worked with it. The Chinampas were an example of this deep understanding of ecology, where the natural resources were used in a way that allowed them to maintain a balance and ensure a steady food supply. Historians still debate how much of the Chinampa system was based on trial and error versus a deep, almost scientific understanding of agriculture. Some argue that the Aztecs' success was due to their careful observation of natural patterns and their willingness to adapt and innovate. Others believe that their agricultural practices were based more on tradition and cultural beliefs. Either way, it's clear that the Chinampas were a remarkable achievement, one that allowed the Aztecs to thrive in an environment that might have otherwise been too challenging for large-scale farming. In addition to growing food for the population, the Chinampas system also played an important role in the Aztec economy. The surplus of crops grown on the floating gardens helped support the bustling marketplaces of Tenochtitlan, where merchants traded goods from across the empire. The Chinampas were not just a way to feed the people, they were a vital part of the economic engine of the Aztec Empire, helping to fuel trade and commerce and supporting the growth of the city. The agricultural success of the Chinampas allowed the Aztecs to build a prosperous and vibrant civilization, where food was abundant and the economy thrived. The floating gardens provided a model of sustainability and efficiency, which is still admired today by modern agriculturalists. And while the Chinampas system eventually fell into disuse after the Spanish conquest, the principles behind it remain an important part of the legacy of the Aztec people. The Chinampas weren't just about feeding people, they were a reflection of the Aztecs' ability to work with their environment, to innovate, and to create something lasting and sustainable. They were a symbol of the ingenuity that allowed the Aztecs to build one of the most powerful and advanced civilizations in the Americas. Now that we've seen how crucial the Chinampas were to Aztec agriculture, let's take a closer look at how these floating gardens impacted daily life in Tenochtitlan. The city was already a marvel of engineering, built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, with canals and causeways connecting its districts. The Chinampas added to this intricate system, enabling the Aztecs to feed their growing population and create a thriving, self-sustaining urban center. But beyond just providing food, the Chinampas also influenced the social, cultural, and economic life of the Aztecs in significant ways. First, consider the way Chinampas impacted the urban layout of Tenochtitlan. The city itself was designed with canals and floating gardens as a central feature. The canals were used for transportation, and the Chinampas were strategically placed around the lakes, often extending out from the shore and into the water. The farmers who lived on the Chinampas worked in close proximity to the city, making it easier to supply fresh produce to the marketplaces and ensure that Tenochtitlan's residents had access to a diverse range of food. In addition to food production, the Chinampas had a social and cultural significance. The Aztecs believed that the act of farming was a sacred duty, tied to their religious beliefs about the relationship between humans and nature. The creation of Chinampas was viewed as an act of cooperation with the gods, particularly the gods of water and fertility, such as Tlaloc. The process of building and maintaining Chinampas involved rituals and prayers, which helped strengthen the connection between the people and the divine. The Chinampas weren't just a physical manifestation of agricultural ingenuity, they were also a spiritual offering. The farmers who worked the Chinampas were often highly skilled, and their work was integral to the functioning of Tenochtitlan. In exchange for their labor, they were part of a larger system of trade that ensured the survival and prosperity of the city. While the wealthier members of society could afford to purchase food from the marketplaces, the farmers on the Chinampas lived a more communal life, working the land together and contributing to the city's food supply. These farmers were also important in the political and religious life of the Aztecs, as their work directly tied into the empire's overall success. Historians still debate the exact roles of the Chinampa farmers in Aztec society. Were they considered part of the lower class, or were they more highly regarded for their connection to the land and the gods? Some argue that farming on the Chinampas was viewed as a noble task, while others suggest that these farmers had less social standing but were still essential to the empire's functioning. Regardless of their social status, the Chinampas were undoubtedly a cornerstone of Aztec daily life, providing both food and a deep connection to the earth and the gods. The Chinampas also played an important role in the economy of Tenochtitlan. As we've seen, they helped feed the growing population, but they also contributed to the city's status as a powerful economic hub. The surplus crops grown on the Chinampas were traded in the bustling marketplaces of Tenochtitlan, where merchants from all over the empire came to exchange goods. The Chinampas helped create a reliable and consistent food supply, ensuring that trade could thrive. This constant flow of agricultural goods helped support the Aztec elite, who could afford to purchase the finest produce from the markets. The Chinampas were also a source of beauty in Tenochtitlan. While the city was known for its impressive architecture, including temples, palaces, and pyramids, the floating gardens added a natural, lush element to the urban landscape. These vibrant green islands, teeming with crops and flowers, made Tenochtitlan one of the most visually stunning cities in the world at the time. The Chinampas were not only a functional feature of the city, they were also a reminder of the Aztecs' ability to harmonize nature and urban life. Today, the Chinampas are considered a model of sustainable farming. The knowledge the Aztecs developed about creating self-sustaining agricultural systems in a challenging environment continues to influence modern-day agricultural practices, particularly in regions where water management and land use are major concerns. The floating gardens were not only a testament to the Aztecs' ingenuity but also to their deep respect for the natural world and their understanding of how to live in harmony with it. The Chinampas were more than just floating gardens. They were an integral part of the Aztec sophisticated system of water management, one of the key reasons their civilization flourished on an island surrounded by lakes. The creation and maintenance of the Chinampas were not only a remarkable feat of engineering but also demonstrated the Aztecs' deep understanding of hydrology and how to use water as a resource rather than a limitation. Tenochtitlan, where the Chinampas were primarily located, sat on an island in Lake Texcoco. The city's growth was constrained by the available space on the island, but the Aztecs turned this challenge into an opportunity, using the surrounding water for agriculture, transportation, and even defensive purposes. The Chinampas were not just farming plots, they were part of an intricate system of canals and artificial islands designed to optimize the use of water, ensuring that the Aztec people had a consistent, year-round food supply. The key to the Chinampas system was the use of lake water, which was redirected through the canals to irrigate the crops. The Aztecs created an elaborate network of canals that wound through the city, linking the Chinampas to the heart of Tenochtitlan. This allowed farmers to move water quickly and efficiently to the floating gardens, ensuring that crops would always have the moisture they needed to thrive. The ability to control water in this way made the Chinampas much more productive than traditional farming methods, which relied solely on rainfall. But the management of water didn't end with irrigation. The Aztecs also used the lake's water for waste management. Rather than letting sewage or waste accumulate in the city, the Aztecs used a system of canals to transport waste away from populated areas. This system helped keep the city clean and ensured that water sources used for agriculture remained uncontaminated. In a city as densely populated as Tenochtitlan, where hygiene was crucial to maintaining public health, the Chinampas system played a key role in ensuring that waste was handled properly and that the water used for farming remained pure. The role of water in the Chinampas system also had spiritual significance for the Aztecs. In their worldview, water was a sacred element tied to fertility and life. The use of water for farming on the Chinampas wasn't just a practical necessity, it was also a symbol of the god's favor. Tlaloc, the god of rain and water, was worshipped as the deity who controlled the life-giving element. The Aztecs believed that the Chinampas were blessed by the gods because they used water so effectively to sustain their people. This connection between water management and spirituality underscores the importance of the Chinampas not only as a physical tool for survival but also as a divine gift that helped maintain balance and prosperity. Historians still debate how the Aztecs' water management systems compared to other ancient civilizations. While the Aztecs didn't have the advanced engineering tools that we take for granted today, their knowledge of how to use water as a resource was far ahead of its time. Some scholars argue that the Aztecs' ability to adapt to their environment, using water for farming and sanitation, was a key factor in their success as a civilization. Others suggest that the Chinampas system was the result of trial and error, refined over generations. Regardless of the origins, it's clear that the use of water in the Chinampas system was crucial to the growth and sustainability of Tenochtitlan. The Chinampas were not just a symbol of agricultural ingenuity, they were part of a larger system of resource management that allowed the Aztecs to thrive in a challenging environment. The ability to harness the power of water, to cultivate food on floating islands, and to keep their city clean and sanitary, all contributed to the success of the Aztec Empire. Even today, the Chinampas are regarded as a model of sustainable farming, showing how ancient people were able to work with their environment in a way that was both practical and spiritually meaningful. Now that we've explored the engineering marvels behind the Chinampas, let's take a moment to consider their effect on the lives of the Aztec farmers who worked them. With their unique design and position in the water, Chinampas created an environment that was not only productive but also peaceful, an oasis of calm in the midst of the busy, often chaotic life in the heart of Tenochtitlan. For the farmers who lived on the Chinampas, the experience of working the land was more than just about growing food, it was about living in harmony with nature. The Chinampas were surrounded by water, and the constant presence of water brought a sense of serenity to those who worked and lived there. The sound of water lapping gently against the floating gardens, the sight of plants growing in abundance, and the fresh air that filled the canals all contributed to a tranquil, peaceful environment. For many Aztec farmers, this environment created an ideal place to rest and sleep. Unlike the crowded and noisy urban spaces of Tenochtitlan, the Chinampas offered a quieter, more relaxed atmosphere. Knights and soldiers might have had to deal with sleep deprivation and constant readiness for battle, but for the farmers, their daily routine, while physically demanding, was more about cultivating a connection with the land and the water. They could rest in a natural environment, often with the sounds of birds, insects, and the water providing a calming soundtrack for sleep. For them, the Chinampas were a place of peace, a sanctuary amidst the bustling world around them. It's easy to imagine that sleeping on the floating gardens would have been much more restful than in the crowded, noisy streets of the city. Even though the Chinampas were built on the water, they were far from unstable. The reeds, mud, and aquatic plants that made up the foundation of the Chinampas created solid, stable ground for both working and sleeping. And unlike traditional land-based farms, the constant presence of water likely made the environment cooler in the heat of the day and night, allowing for more comfortable sleep, especially during the hot seasons. What's more, the farmers who worked the Chinampas were typically well connected to the land they worked. The Aztecs had a deep spiritual connection to nature, and many of their rituals and daily practices revolved around honoring the earth and the forces that nourished them. For these farmers, working the floating gardens wasn't just a job, it was part of their sacred relationship with the gods. This connection to nature and the divine likely contributed to a sense of peace and contentment, making sleep a natural part of their rhythm of life. Historians still debate whether the Chinampas provided more than just a physical benefit. Could the farmers' lifestyle, surrounded by nature and working in harmony with the water, have had a positive effect on their mental and emotional well-being, contributing to better sleep. Some scholars argue that the peaceful environment of the Chinampas helped reduce stress and promote restful sleep, while others believe that any such benefits were incidental and not intentionally built into the design of the floating gardens. Either way, the combination of physical labor, spiritual connection, and a serene environment made the Chinampas an ideal place for rest, allowing those who lived and worked there to enjoy peaceful, rejuvenating sleep. In contrast to the often stressful and exhausting lives of the warriors, priests, and rulers of the Aztec society, the farmers working on the Chinampas were likely able to enjoy a slower pace of life, one that aligned with the natural world. And in that slower, more peaceful existence, sleep was a natural part of the rhythm. The Chinampas allowed them to not only thrive during their waking hours but also to rest and recover, which is something many of us could learn from today. While the farmers' lives were still challenging, the peacefulness of their environment allowed them to sleep in a way that people living in the crowded urban areas of Tenochtitlan could only dream of. It was a balance of nature and work, providing a restful respite that allowed the farmers to wake up each day ready to tend to their gardens once again. Now that we've explored the restful environment of the Chinampas, let's compare the experience of sleeping in these peaceful floating gardens with the conditions in the bustling urban center of Tenochtitlan. While the Chinampas offered a tranquil, water-based escape, the rest of the city was often chaotic and crowded, with noise, pollution, and a general lack of space. Sleeping in such an environment was a far cry from the calm, nature-filled surroundings of the Chinampas, and the contrast between the two offers a glimpse into how different social classes experienced rest and relaxation in the Aztec world. Tenochtitlan was a marvel of urban planning, its streets lined with marketplaces, temples, and grand palaces. However, for all its grandeur, it was also a densely packed city, home to a large population. In these crowded spaces, sleep was often compromised by the sheer activity of daily life. The constant movement of people, the sounds of vendors shouting their wares, the clattering of carts, and the general hustle and bustle made the city far from a peaceful place to rest. For the wealthy elite living in palaces or the priests living near the temples, sleep might have been more comfortable, but still subject to the noise and activity that filled the air. In contrast, the Chinampas were designed to be an escape from this urban frenzy. The floating gardens were located on the outskirts of the city, where they were surrounded by water and nature. These gardens allowed for a much quieter existence. Farmers living on the Chinampas were not only benefiting from the agricultural productivity of the gardens, but they were also surrounded by the calming sounds of water and wildlife. The natural environment, combined with the slower pace of life, allowed for a more peaceful atmosphere at night. Historians still debate how much the environment affected the sleep quality of Tenochtitlan's inhabitants. Was the constant noise of the city simply an accepted part of life, or did it impact the overall health and well-being of the Aztecs? In urban societies, sleep disturbances from noise and overcrowding are well documented, and it's likely that the Aztecs living in the heart of Tenochtitlan faced similar challenges. Despite this, the city was a center of power, wealth, and culture, and the Aztecs were known to be resilient in adapting to their surroundings. One of the key differences between urban and rural sleep in Tenochtitlan was the accessibility of nature. While the farmers of the Chinampas lived directly in harmony with nature, those in the city had to seek out green spaces. Parks, temple gardens, and the canals that wound through the city offered some respite, but these spaces weren't always enough to shield the urban population from the pressures of city life. The elite, who had access to larger, more private living quarters, might have been able to find some measure of peace, but even their sleep was likely disturbed by the noise and busy nature of the city. For the common people living in Tenochtitlan, sleep was likely fragmented. The constant need for vigilance, whether because of the threat of war or the demands of daily life, would have made restful sleep difficult to achieve. The construction of buildings, the movement of people, and the day-to-day hustle meant that rest was often a luxury. This stark contrast to the Chinampas' environment highlights a critical difference in the lives of the urban and rural Aztecs. While the rural farmer had access to peace and quiet, the urban dweller had to navigate the noise, activity, and demands of a growing metropolis. The contrast in sleep environments also speaks to the broader differences in the daily lives of the social classes. The Chinampas system, while vital for feeding the population, was also a way to ensure that those who lived on them enjoyed a peaceful, restful existence, something that was often out of reach for those living in the heart of Tenochtitlan. While the elite and powerful enjoyed privileges, the working class and farmers lived a life more connected to the natural world, where the rhythm of life was slower, and the need for rest was met in the tranquility of their surroundings. As we reflect on these differences, it's worth noting how the Aztecs recognized the importance of balance, between work and rest, between nature and urban life. While the Chinampas system provided the perfect environment for restful sleep, it also reinforced the idea that the physical world and the spiritual world were intertwined. The peacefulness of the floating gardens wasn't just about farming, it was about creating an environment where people could rest, rejuvenate, and maintain harmony with the world around them. As we explore the peaceful lives of those who worked on the Chinampas, we come to a fascinating point. The Aztecs' connection to nature played a pivotal role not just in their daily lives but also in how they experienced rest and sleep. For the farmers working the Chinampas, sleep wasn't just about recovering from physical exertion, it was about aligning themselves with the natural world. The floating gardens weren't just a means of feeding the population, they were a spiritual space where the Aztecs could find tranquility, both physically and mentally. Imagine the peaceful environment surrounding the Chinampas, the sound of water rippling, the soft rustle of reeds in the breeze, and the calls of birds nesting nearby. This serene backdrop helped to create a calming atmosphere, essential for a restful night's sleep. The presence of water was especially significant. It was viewed as a life-giving force by the Aztecs, intimately tied to the gods, especially Tlaloc, the god of rain and water. Water, to the Aztecs, wasn't just a physical resource, it was a spiritual one. Its constant presence around the Chinampas likely played a major role in reducing stress and promoting sleep. For a people who lived closely with their environment, the calming sounds of water and the gentle sway of the floating gardens provided a soothing lullaby at night. The proximity to nature also meant that the Aztec farmers had a better sense of the rhythms of the earth. Their connection to the land wasn't just about growing food, it was about a deeply spiritual understanding of the cycles of life, growth, and rest. The Chinampas allowed for year-round agriculture, and the constant access to fresh water and nutrient-rich soil made them sustainable. But the connection to nature didn't end with farming. For these people, living in harmony with nature was an essential part of the sleep cycle. By aligning themselves with the natural flow of the water, the crops, and the seasons, the farmers created a peaceful environment where their bodies could rest and recharge. Historians still argue about the extent to which the Aztecs understood the physiological effects of nature on sleep. Did they have an innate understanding of the calming effects of nature, or was it purely symbolic? Some believe that the Aztecs were simply tapping into the inherent peace of the natural world without necessarily understanding the science behind it. Others argue that their deeply spiritual practices, including their approach to farming and sleep, were a way of maintaining harmony between the mind, body, and soul, which we know today contributes to better mental health and more restful sleep. What's undeniable is that the peacefulness of the Chinampas contributed to a lifestyle that promoted better sleep, whether it was through the soothing effect of the water or the connection to the natural rhythms of the world. The quiet environment on the floating gardens provided a stark contrast to the noise and busyness of the urban areas of Tenochtitlan, where the bustle of city life often interrupted sleep. In the Chinampas, the farmers had a peaceful refuge, a place where they could find rest, both physically and spiritually, ensuring they woke up each day ready to continue their work and their connection to the land. In modern times, we often hear about the health benefits of being close to nature. Studies have shown that spending time in natural environments can reduce stress, lower blood pressure, and improve sleep quality. The Aztecs understood this instinctively, incorporating nature into every aspect of their lives, from their farming practices to their spiritual rituals. The Chinampas weren't just a clever agricultural solution, they were a testament to the Aztecs' deep understanding of the natural world and its importance to human well-being. The tranquil surroundings of the Chinampas provided an ideal environment for rest and rejuvenation, ensuring that those who lived and worked there could enjoy peaceful nights and wake up ready to face the challenges of the day. Today, we continue to seek out natural spaces for relaxation and rest, whether it's a weekend getaway to the countryside or a walk through the park. The Aztecs, with their Chinampas, were ahead of their time in recognizing the importance of nature in maintaining balance and health. The floating gardens were not just a means of providing food, they were a means of creating harmony and peace, offering the perfect environment for restful sleep. As we continue to delve into the lives of those who lived and worked on the Chinampas, it's essential to understand the spiritual significance these floating gardens held for the Aztecs. The Chinampas weren't just a practical solution to the problem of limited land, they were also a deeply spiritual element of Aztec culture. The connection to nature, the divine, and the cosmos was woven into every aspect of Aztec life, including their approach to sleep and agriculture. The Chinampas were not just about feeding people, they were about feeding the soul, maintaining balance with the gods, and ensuring that the divine forces were on their side. One of the key deities associated with the Chinampas was Tlaloc, the god of rain and water. Tlaloc was central to Aztec beliefs about fertility and agricultural abundance, and the floating gardens were seen as a gift from the gods. The Aztecs believed that the act of creating land out of water was a divine act, something that required the favor of Tlaloc and other gods. The Chinampas were therefore viewed as sacred spaces, where the connection between humans and the divine was made manifest. By creating these gardens, the Aztecs were not just cultivating crops, they were cultivating a relationship with the gods, ensuring that the earth would remain fertile and that their people would have the resources they needed to survive. Beyond Tlaloc, other deities were also associated with the Chinampas and the land itself. For example, Xochiquetzal, the goddess of flowers, beauty, and love, was believed to bless the gardens with her divine energy. Flowers, which were grown in abundance on the Chinampas, played an important role in religious rituals, offerings, and ceremonies. The act of planting and harvesting on the Chinampas wasn't just a mundane task, it was an offering to the gods, an act of devotion that helped maintain harmony between the human and divine worlds. The spiritual connection to the Chinampas extended beyond the crops themselves. The act of tending to the gardens was a way for the Aztecs to honor the gods and maintain the balance of Ma'at, the divine order that governed the universe. The natural world was seen as a reflection of the divine, and by caring for the Chinampas, the farmers were actively participating in the upkeep of this cosmic order. The peaceful environment of the floating gardens allowed for reflection and quiet contemplation, both of which were necessary for maintaining the mental and spiritual clarity needed for their work and their connection to the gods. Sleep, of course, was an essential part of this spiritual balance. The Aztecs didn't just sleep for physical rest, they slept to restore their connection with the divine, to ensure that their dreams were filled with guidance and protection from the gods. The Chinampas themselves, with their peaceful, water-based environment, were an ideal place to rest and renew the soul. It's easy to see how the tranquil atmosphere of the Chinampas provided not only physical comfort but also spiritual solace, contributing to a deep sense of peace that allowed the Aztecs to rest peacefully and be ready for the day ahead. Historians still debate how much the Aztecs truly understood the connection between agriculture, sleep, and spirituality. Some suggest that the Chinampas were primarily an agricultural solution, with the spiritual significance added later as the importance of water and fertility became more deeply ingrained in Aztec religion. Others argue that the Aztecs always viewed their work on the Chinampas as a sacred duty, with every act of planting and harvesting tied to religious devotion and spiritual belief. Regardless of the specifics, the role of the Chinampas in Aztec spirituality cannot be overstated. These floating gardens were not just a way to grow food, they were a means of aligning with the gods, maintaining balance, and ensuring the health of both the land and the people. The spiritual connection to the Chinampas reflects the larger worldview of the Aztecs, where every aspect of life was seen through the lens of spirituality and divine influence. The natural world was never separate from the gods, it was an active participant in the divine order. And the Chinampas, as a physical manifestation of this connection, were at the heart of Aztec life, providing sustenance and spiritual fulfillment in equal measure. For the Aztecs, tending to the Chinampas was not just about feeding the body, it was about feeding the soul, restoring balance, and maintaining harmony with the forces that governed their world. As we move further along in our exploration of the Chinampas, we come to a more somber chapter in their history, their decline. The Chinampas system, so vital to the Aztec way of life, began to fall into disuse following the Spanish conquest. With the fall of the Aztec Empire in 1521, many of the traditional agricultural practices, including the use of floating gardens, were abandoned or altered by the new colonial powers. But what happened to these extraordinary farming systems, and why did they fade into the background after the arrival of the Spanish? When the Spanish arrived, the Aztec civilization was at its peak, and the Chinampas were an integral part of the city's infrastructure and food supply. However, after the conquest, the Spanish sought to impose their own agricultural practices and structures upon the indigenous people. The Spanish introduced European farming methods, which focused more on large-scale monoculture rather than the diverse, sustainable farming practices used by the Aztecs. This shift in agricultural priorities, along with the introduction of new crops and livestock, led to the decline of the Chinampas system. Additionally, the changes in land ownership and the establishment of colonial settlements played a role in disrupting the Chinampas. The Spanish brought with them new ideas of land ownership that didn't align with the Aztec understanding of communal land use. As the Spanish established new systems of land distribution, the Chinampas were often abandoned or repurposed for other forms of agriculture. The flood of new settlers also led to a depletion of the resources needed to maintain the floating gardens. Many of the lakes that had supported the Chinampas were drained or altered to make way for European-style farming, further contributing to their decline. Historians still debate the exact extent to which the Chinampas continued to function after the Spanish conquest. Some argue that the system survived in some form for centuries after the arrival of the Spanish, particularly in areas near modern-day Mexico City. There are still communities that use Chinampa-like farming techniques in the region, and in some areas, the floating gardens have been revived as part of efforts to promote sustainable agriculture and preserve ancient traditions. Others argue that the Chinampas disappeared rapidly with the imposition of colonial agricultural practices and the destruction of the Aztec capital. What is clear, however, is that the Spanish conquest and the subsequent changes in land use had a profound impact on the Chinampas. The colonization of the Aztec Empire brought with it a host of changes that altered the landscape, agricultural systems, and social structures that had supported the Chinampas for centuries. The floating gardens, once central to the Aztec way of life, began to fade into the background as new farming practices took hold. This shift is a reminder of how quickly civilizations can change under the weight of conquest and colonization. The decline of the Chinampas is also a reflection of the broader collapse of the Aztec way of life. After the conquest, many aspects of Aztec culture were lost or redefined under Spanish rule. The spiritual practices tied to the Chinampas, the connection to the gods, and the agricultural traditions were all disrupted, leading to a loss of knowledge and expertise about how to maintain the floating gardens. However, the influence of the Chinampas system never fully disappeared. Their ingenuity and environmental sustainability have been remembered and revived in recent times, proving that their legacy endures. As the Chinampas system declined, the people who had once lived and worked on them were forced to adapt to the new colonial reality. Yet, the memory of the floating gardens lived on. The Aztec innovation in agriculture is a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of their civilization, and while the system was disrupted by the forces of colonization, it remains an enduring symbol of sustainable living. Though the Chinampas system largely declined after the Spanish conquest, its legacy has not been entirely lost to history. In modern times, the floating gardens have experienced a resurgence of interest, both for their historical significance and as a model of sustainable agriculture. In fact, many areas around Mexico City still practice a form of Chinampa-style farming, and efforts are underway to restore and preserve this ancient technique. The ingenuity of the Aztecs in creating a self-sustaining agricultural system that worked in harmony with nature has proven to be far more than just a relic of the past. It has become a symbol of sustainable farming practices in the 21st century. The Chinampas that survive today are primarily found in the Xochimilco region, just south of modern Mexico City. This area, which once formed part of the expansive network of Chinampas that fed the city of Tenochtitlan, still contains remnants of the ancient floating gardens. These areas are now UNESCO World Heritage Sites, recognized for their cultural and historical importance. The canals, lined with chinampas, are still used for agriculture, and local farmers continue to grow crops like corn, flowers, and vegetables using the same methods that the Aztecs once employed. One of the key reasons the chinampas are still relevant today is their sustainability. In a world facing the challenges of climate change, overpopulation, and environmental degradation, the chinampas offer a sustainable way to grow food in urban areas. The floating gardens rely on a closed-loop system, where water is used efficiently and the soil is constantly replenished with nutrients from the lake. This system allows for year-round farming without the need for chemical fertilizers or pesticides, making it an environmentally friendly alternative to modern agricultural methods that often rely on intensive land use and harmful chemicals. Historians and environmentalists alike are now recognizing the value of the chinampas as a model for future urban farming. The modern interest in chinampas is part of a broader movement to incorporate traditional knowledge into contemporary farming practices. Urban agriculture, especially in densely populated cities like Mexico City, has become a vital topic of discussion as communities search for ways to feed growing populations without further damaging the environment. Chinampa-style farming, with its emphasis on sustainability, resource efficiency, and minimal environmental impact, offers a potential solution to these challenges. Some contemporary projects are even incorporating chinampas into modern urban planning. For example, initiatives have been launched to reintroduce chinampa-based farming to help alleviate food shortages, reduce pollution, and promote green spaces in urban areas. These modern chinampas are helping to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern sustainability, proving that the lessons of the past can have real-world applications today. There are still debates, however, on how much the chinampas can realistically contribute to modern agriculture. Some scholars argue that while chinampas are certainly sustainable in small-scale applications, they may not be scalable enough to feed large, urban populations as effectively as modern agriculture does. Others contend that the principles behind chinampas, such as organic farming, local food production, and sustainable land use, are precisely what modern agriculture needs to embrace. It's clear that while chinampas may not be able to solve all of our food security problems, they offer a glimpse of what a more sustainable, balanced agricultural system could look like. Looking back at the Aztecs, their ability to create such an innovative and sustainable agricultural system more than 500 years ago is nothing short of impressive. In a world that was so different from ours, the Aztecs had a profound understanding of how to live in harmony with their environment. The chinampas were not just a method of farming, they were an embodiment of the Aztecs' relationship with the gods, the land, and the water. They were a model of ingenuity, sustainability, and spiritual connection, all of which continue to inspire us today. While the chinampas have undergone changes over time, their legacy endures. In a world where modern farming techniques often lead to environmental degradation and loss of biodiversity, the chinampas offer a way forward, a return to agricultural practices that respect and work with nature. By looking back at the chinampas, we can find inspiration for creating a more sustainable future, one where we work with the land rather than exploiting it. The floating gardens of the Aztecs are not just an ancient marvel, they are a blueprint for the future. As we reflect on the lasting impact of the chinampas, we arrive at an important question: were they truly a sustainable agricultural system, or were they merely a clever solution to the specific challenges of the Aztec era? The chinampas have become celebrated as a model of sustainable farming, but historians and environmentalists still debate whether they were as efficient and resilient as modern agricultural systems or if their sustainability was limited by their environmental context. On one hand, the chinampas seem to check all the boxes for sustainable agriculture. They were built using the natural resources available in the lakes, which meant little to no external inputs like chemical fertilizers or pesticides. The nutrient-rich lakebed mud provided an abundant growing medium, while the surrounding water acted as a built-in irrigation system, keeping the crops hydrated throughout the year. The close proximity of the chinampas to Tenochtitlan's canals made them ideal for year-round farming, producing a variety of crops without the need for clearing vast amounts of land. In this sense, the Chinampas represented a highly efficient use of land and resources, creating a closed-loop system that helped to support a large population without depleting the environment. The ability of the Chinampas to produce multiple harvests per year was one of their most impressive features. Unlike traditional farming methods that relied on seasonal rain, the Chinampas allowed the Aztecs to grow crops like maize, beans, squash, and flowers continuously. This not only ensured a stable food supply but also provided economic stability, supporting the vibrant markets of Tenochtitlan. Moreover, because the Chinampas didn't require intensive land clearing or the use of large-scale farming equipment, they preserved the natural landscape and provided a sustainable solution to the growing food demands of the Aztec population. However, there are scholars who question the true long-term sustainability of the Chinampas system. While the Chinampas may have been highly productive in the short term, they were still subject to the limitations of the lake environment. The constant need for fresh water, for example, was a challenge. The water levels in Lake Texcoco could fluctuate, and when the Spanish arrived, much of the lake system was altered, leading to the drainage of parts of the lake and the subsequent destruction of many Chinampas. While the system worked beautifully for the Aztecs, the changes brought by colonization and urbanization significantly altered the hydrology of the region, and the Chinampas couldn't adapt quickly enough to the changes. Another factor contributing to the debate is the labor-intensive nature of Chinampa farming. Building and maintaining the floating gardens required significant human effort. The Aztecs had to continually dredge the lake to collect mud, renew the reed mats, and manage the canals. While this system was highly efficient in terms of land use, it was also physically demanding, and it required constant attention. The labor involved might not have been sustainable in the long term, especially as the population of Tenochtitlan grew and more resources were required to maintain the system. Historians still argue whether the Chinampas system was a true model of sustainability or whether it was a highly localized and environmentally specific solution that would have struggled to scale. The Chinampas were part of an ancient system that was closely linked to the water levels of Lake Texcoco, the availability of natural resources, and a relatively small population that could manage the intensive work required to maintain them. Whether or not this system could have continued to support the city as it grew, and whether it could have been replicated in other parts of Mesoamerica, remains a point of discussion. However, the revival of Chinampas in modern times has sparked renewed interest in their potential for sustainable agriculture. As the world faces challenges like climate change, soil depletion, and the need for sustainable urban farming, the Chinampas have been recognized as a potential model for farming in cities. The techniques used in the floating gardens could help provide food for growing urban populations while minimizing environmental impact. The revival of the Chinampas is an example of how ancient wisdom can inspire modern solutions to contemporary problems. Despite the uncertainty about the long-term sustainability of the Chinampas, their legacy continues to be celebrated as a testament to the Aztecs' ingenuity. The Chinampas were an example of how humans can work in harmony with their environment, making the most of available resources while maintaining a balance with nature. In a world where environmental sustainability is a growing concern, the Aztecs' ability to create a self-sustaining agricultural system in the middle of a lake serves as a reminder of the potential for innovative, sustainable solutions in modern agriculture. As we wrap up our exploration of the Chinampas and their impact on both the Aztec Empire and modern agricultural practices, it's important to reflect on the incredible legacy these floating gardens have left behind. The Chinampas were more than just an ancient farming technique, they were a testament to the ingenuity, sustainability, and deep cultural connection that the Aztecs had with their environment. Even today, as we look for solutions to the challenges of modern agriculture, we can find inspiration in the principles that underpin the Chinampa system. One of the most remarkable things about the Chinampas is how they represent an early understanding of environmental balance and sustainability. The Aztecs created a farming system that worked in harmony with the surrounding water and land. By using the resources available to them, lake mud, aquatic plants, and local materials, they were able to grow a diverse range of crops year-round without depleting the environment. In today's world, where agricultural practices often involve heavy use of chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and monoculture farming, the Chinampas offer a model for how we might approach food production in a more sustainable way. As we've seen, modern efforts to revive the Chinampas system are gaining traction, particularly in urban areas where space is limited and food security is a concern. The rise of urban farming and the incorporation of Chinampa-inspired techniques into contemporary agricultural projects reflect a growing recognition of the value of this ancient practice. The Chinampas have proven to be not just a relic of the past, but a viable and innovative solution to modern problems. By reintroducing these sustainable practices, we are tapping into a rich history of environmental stewardship that can help us build a more sustainable future. But the legacy of the Chinampas isn't just about farming, it's also about the cultural and spiritual connection that the Aztecs had to their land. The Chinampas were more than just a way to grow food, they were an expression of the Aztecs' deep respect for nature and their belief in the divine forces that governed the earth. The act of cultivating the land through the Chinampas system was seen as a sacred duty, and the floating gardens themselves were imbued with spiritual significance. For the Aztecs, the Chinampas were a way to align themselves with the gods and ensure that the forces of nature would continue to work in their favor. In many ways, the Chinampas were a model of resilience, both in the face of the natural world and in the face of human challenges. The Aztecs built a system that allowed them to thrive in a challenging environment, adapting to the limitations of their surroundings while making the most of the resources they had. This resilience is a quality we can still draw inspiration from today. In a world where environmental challenges like climate change, soil depletion, and water scarcity are increasingly pressing, the Chinampas remind us that there are alternative ways to farm and live sustainably, ways that can help us build resilience in the face of adversity. Historians still debate the true scale of the Chinampas system, and whether it could have been applied on a larger scale across Mesoamerica. Some argue that the Chinampas were an effective solution to the specific needs of the Aztec people, while others suggest that they could have been adapted for use in other regions as well. What's clear is that the Chinampas were a remarkable achievement, both in terms of their agricultural productivity and their cultural significance. They were a living example of the Aztecs' ingenuity and their ability to harmonize with the natural world. As we look to the future, it's important to recognize that the Chinampas system offers valuable lessons for modern agriculture. In a time when sustainability is more important than ever, the principles behind the Chinampas, using local resources, working with nature, and creating self-sustaining systems, can guide us toward a more sustainable and harmonious way of farming. By remembering the wisdom of the past and applying it to the challenges of the present, we can create a future where both people and the planet thrive together. So, while the Chinampas may have been created centuries ago, their legacy is very much alive today. From their role in feeding the Aztec Empire to their influence on modern urban farming, the Chinampas continue to inspire us to think about agriculture, sustainability, and our relationship with nature in new ways. And who knows, perhaps the future of farming will once again look to the floating gardens of the Aztecs for guidance, as we strive to create a more sustainable world.